Welcome to the castles, a massive stone enclosure the size of a football pitch. And for once on Time Team, there's plenty of archaeology on the surface. So what's the big mystery? With 5,000 tonnes of stone right in front of us, this should be easy. Well, in fact, for hundreds of years, this site's baffled everyone who's seen it. It's been called everything from an Iron Age homestead to a Roman prison to a Dark Age stronghold. So what was it really? When was it built? And who was the king of the castles? We've only got 3 days. Is that enough time to find out? The remains of the castles lie near Hamsterley, 20 miles southwest of Durham in the Wear Valley. Sitting on the side of a hill in a sheep farm, the site's a huge dry stone enclosure measuring approximately 70 by 90 metres. Now overgrown with trees, its crumbling walls still form a monumental structure. But even so, no one knows what it is or when it was built. Although this massive site has always attracted speculation, bizarrely, it's only really been investigated once, in the 1920s by a local antiquarian called Hodgkin. But is his work a help or a hindrance? Do we know much about this antiquarian?
His name was Hodgkin. He lived locally. In fact, he lived just over the hill over there. Now, when he was on site, he put a few trenches in. He was looking for internal structures, but he didn't find any, unfortunately.
What about finds?
No, there was no finds either. But there is a list of local reports of things found in the area. Things like the arm bones of a youngish woman, or fossilized tusks, or a few flints.
What about the outside walls? Did he do any work there?
Yeah, as you can see, he cleared away a lot of the rubble to expose the facing. And he also exposed this great, fantastic gate here.
It's really well preserved.
That's great, isn't it? But presumably we don't know what part of the structure is original and what part he just put back.
But more importantly, around the back of that wall, he discovered the most amazing guardhouse.
Let's have a look. Oh, Mick, have you seen this?
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Is it really a guardhouse?
It's very difficult to believe that this is all original, though, isn't it?
Well, we have his photos.
Right.
And the photos do show these openings into this guard chamber.
So it looks as if it is original.
Yeah, I think it's got to be, but I think the only way we're going to prove it for sure would actually to be dig a hole on the other side, because when you get one guard chamber, you get a matching one on the other side. That's what I want to do next.
What, where this gorse bush is?
Yeah, well, I think we've got to base it on this bit of wall here.
Yeah.
And just go back there.
Tell you what, we can tell people where to put the trenches in. There's going to be a heck of a lot of stone shifting, isn't there? We'll just mark it up and slope off.
Unmanly.
So we're putting in a trench on the eastern side by the entrance to the enclosure to see if there is another guardhouse. If we find one, it'll tell us if the existing chamber's original and give us an architectural clue to the castle's date and function.
Now we're moving.
Laying siege to the entrance, the archaeologists flex their muscles, beginning to shift the mountains of tumbled stone.
Do you know what? They'd have had to have done this in reverse when they were building it.
We're also putting in another trench across the north wall, hoping to learn more about its construction and locate the early ground surface and datable artefacts. In the entrance, we're trying to discover if there's a second guard chamber. But since the castle's is basically a massive dry stone wall, it's hard to tell fallen rubble from standing remains.
Does it have had any kind of bonding material at all?
Well, sometimes with these dry stone structures, they used to put clay bonding, almost like a putty in between the stones, but it washes out with the rain. I think you're still in rubble there, actually, Matt.
The longer we're here, the more of a mystery this place seems to be.
It's one of County Durham's least understood sites.
What are the stories about it?
In the 1st century, this area was occupied by the tribe of the Brigantes, and their relations with the Romans were quite turbulent at times, and the theory goes that the castles could have been a refuge when they were defeated in a major battle near their main base near Stanwick.
What else?
Another one is it was a Roman penal colony where slaves working in neighbouring lead mines were kept. Now, both of these suggestions are theoretically possible. We're not that far from Stanwick, and there are lead deposits in the area, but there's no real evidence for either.
So it's one of those things where people tell a story about a place, and after a while everyone just believes it.
Yes, it's sort of fiction becoming fact, or speculation becoming fact.
The castles is steeped in legend, but this just increases our challenge to separate the fiction from the facts. On the north side, things are progressing well. Phil and Faye have revealed a face of the wall and are investigating whether they've reached the foundations and the original ground surface. as we lift the stones in the entrance to the east, the archaeology is increasingly complicated.
Ian, when we laid this trench out this morning, we put it around this bit of wall because this lines up with that, and we thought that that had to be genuine. But now you've been looking at the photographs and have been getting me a bit worried.
The interesting thing is this big stone that we have down at the bottom of the trench, which is currently lying flat. I think what's been happening is I think maybe this edge here is an edge to receive that stone. It's projecting slightly into the entrance corridor so that you can rest a timber gate of some form against it.
So you'd have had a gate up against that stone. But then what would you have had? I mean, if you've got attackers, what would you have had to stop them knocking the gate backwards?
One possibility is over here, where we've got this. And this looks very much like some kind of bar hole feature that's been deliberately built into the wall to receive a pretty substantial kind of piece of timber, which you would use to secure a timber door.
As Emma moves inside to find organic evidence, we've also begun to lay siege to the southern wall with a third trench. Since it's more built up here, this will increase our chances of revealing a well-preserved section of wall. One thing's for sure, it's going to be a mammoth job. We're hoping that this trench will give us an indication of the wall's original dimensions and how it was constructed. But at the north wall, with less stone to shift, Phil and Faye are well ahead of the game.
Are we getting anywhere with this trench?
I think we are, actually.
Right.
We've just started to hit a different surface or a different layer, so it's a lot more compact. So I think actually it's beginning to get quite exciting.
Is that the old ground surface then?
And it's a difficult one to call. You see, the surprising thing is, you see, we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 courses of wall. If I push my trowel in there, it doesn't look to be another course there.
Right.
So down there, where you've got these massive walls standing metres high, there doesn't seem to have been represented here. It looks maybe as though it's been robbed away. But what is the big problem, of course, is trying to establish whether the wall is standing on an old ground surface or whether it's been cut into an old ground surface. We just don't know.
Yesterday we concentrated all our efforts on the exterior walls so that we could understand when and how they were built. On the north wall, Faye thinks that she might have located the original ground surface and is still searching for any datable finds. We're also beginning to learn how the site was constructed, as Naomi and the team clear tons of fallen rubble from the southern wall. While over at the entrance, we've moved mountains to expose the gateway. But how does it fit in with the original guardhouse? Yesterday, Francis was adamant that what we'd got here was a gatehouse, and what it was guarding was this big entranceway here, and on the far side of the entranceway there would have been some form of gateway represented by this stone structure, and in front of it there would have been that big slab with presumably some kind of door or gate swinging against it. So is that still what we think the story is?
No.
Oh, surprise, surprise.
I still think it's an entrance house of some sort.
Yes.
Okay? But it doesn't go with the original construction of this fort.
Ah.
Underneath this slab, the wall actually comes out. Now, this is new. It's stepped out, and it would have supported that stone vertically. So you've got a staggered wall of the entrance to the fort. And then Ian has found something similar on that side.
These walls over here, which we've had right from the start, what you'll see is that the alignments don't match up. And in fact, there's a very distinct step or recess that matches the one we have on the other side.
So why does that mean that the guardhouse isn't part of this setup?
Well, basically, what you would have had to have had would be another one of these big stones standing over here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work with this gatehouse. So this gatehouse basically has got to be put in after that original gateway organisation has gone out of use.
But that would look really impressive, wouldn't it, with 2 big stones and the big wooden gates behind?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the archaeology suggests that the entrance was fronted by 2 stone slabs flanking an impressive wooden gate. Their central position is the most likely place for occupation. Hodgkin had found stones here, and we want to check out whether they could be evidence of structures. As the new trenches get underway, our north wall trench has come to its end.
So I see Naomi's doing the recording here. Does that mean we've finished with this trench now?
Yep, we're closing this trench up.
So what did you decide in the end?
Well, actually it's really interesting. What we've actually got is them using the natural slope. So here, what Naomi's sitting on is actually the natural.
Right.
And it
that's sort of
slopes
orangey,
down.
yellowy stuff down
Yeah.
there. So is that set back into the mound then?
Yep. Yeah, it is.
And the $64,000 question, any fines from it?
No, you were right, none at all.
So we've really got no idea of date except for the type of walling it is, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we have got the original walling, I think, there. Apart from that, I can't say anything more.
Although we haven't discovered any finds, we're beginning to understand more about the construction of the site. Instead of being built on a surface, the north wall was cut into the natural slope. And after a day and a half, Mick's keen to learn how the southern wall was constructed.
Naomi, why have you brought me to this dark, dirty hole here?
Well, there is a good reason for that, Mick.
Right.
Yesterday, on the other side of this trench, we had one face of a wall, and we've discovered the other face.
Oh, right, so this is the outer face. We had the inner face yesterday.
That's right, yeah.
So is this original, or is this a bit of Hodgkin's reconstruction?
No, I think this is the original wall, because I think if it was rebuilt and reconstructed, it would be much straighter.
Yeah.
Whereas this, as you can see, it's all starting to lean in and collapse slightly, and that's just a process of time, really.
Here we are in an Iron Age enclosure. Where is the most likely place for the building to be? Now, if you look back through there, we are slap bang in line with the main entrance. And in fact, we are slap bang in the middle of the enclosure, which is the most likely place for the high status building. Now, if we assume that anybody but Mr. and Mrs. Clean and Tidy was living here, you'd expect to find some traces that they lived here.
But we know there was ploughing here. Couldn't it be ploughed out?
Ah, this trench is placed on a ridge, so the archaeology is more likely to be preserved underneath it, and the furrows are on either side.
As digging begins to uncover more about the castle's date and function, our wall survey has revealed how it was constructed.
Peter, this site has proven to be a hell of a problem to date. In places we have original build, and then in other places we have Hodgkin's rebuild.
Yeah.
Is there any difference?
We know that Hodgkin's says that the lower few courses on this wall were original. This, with the smaller stones, thinner stones, this is Hodgkin's rebuild.
I can't help but notice these steps. Are they to get up onto the top of the wall?
Well, that was Hodgkin's belief, but I'm not convinced they are steps. If you look at them, there's not a scrap of wear on them anywhere. Now, if these have been used as steps, the edge would be quite rounded and worn, and there's no sign of that. I think this is the result of this part of the wall falling in ancient times, maybe a couple of thousand years ago, leaving the ragged end here, which they've consolidated with big stones, and then they've rebuilt this slightly thinner.
A lot cleaner now, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a lot cleaner, but as it's been cleaned up, we've seen that these stones are straight and form part of a rectangular building.
Right.
Right, so it can't be Iron Age, I don't think, but at that end, it's cut by those furrows.
So what date are they?
1780 was when this land was enclosed, so...
Right, so a pre-18th century building, but not Roman or medieval, presumably?
No. No, I think you're looking at something a little bit earlier than that, earlier than the medieval. You have that cell thing over there.
Yeah.
That might be Dark Age.
So are we really thinking this is a Dark Age building?
Well,
because
why
it'd
not?
be a wow if it is.
So it looks as though any Iron Age roundhouse that might have been here has been ploughed away. And instead, we found a square, potentially Dark Age structure, which would have been contemporary with the Dark Age guardhouse at the entrance.
When you come to a site like this and work on a project like this, there's all sorts of other things you can use. The comparative size and shape of the site itself. You look at its position in the landscape and see if that tells you anything. And we've done that, and they've been very productive, haven't they?
So we can say quite firmly, this is a late Iron Age enclosure. This is essentially a farmstead, a very elaborate one, but a farmstead probably of the late Iron Age period.
Can we say any more than that?
What we can say is where we've got evidence for this site in Northumberland at South Headon, where there seems to be a largely pastoral economy towards the end of the Iron Age, and that's quite important because we can then compare that with other sites where you find big enclosures but there's only a very small number of houses in them. What's all that other space used for? It seems to be because you need space to bring the animals in. They're your investment, that's your power base, as it were, in this bit of landscape within which they live.
So our 3-day siege has brought us closer to untangling the age-old mystery of the castles. The enclosed farmstead was built in the Iron Age. Its 5-metre thick stone walls would have stood 3 metres high, and the eastern entrance was fronted by 2 massive stones flanking an impressive wooden gate. There would probably have been a large stone roundhouse positioned opposite the gate. Stone cattle enclosures were built in the shelter of the walls, which would have protected the livestock. Later in the Dark Ages, the gate was modified and a substantial guard chamber added. The central roundhouse was replaced by a square building.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Deep in the gloom of these Scottish caves are messages from one of the most enigmatic peoples ever to live in Britain. This is just one of many symbols carved by the Picts, a people who so worried the Romans that they built Hadrian's Wall just to keep them out. But that's just part of these caves' colourful history. Over the centuries, Jacobite aristocracy, World War II refugees, even hermits have all sought shelter here. But now they're under threat. Rising sea levels mean it's only a matter of time before they succumb to the dark, cold Firth of Forth. And that's why we're here, to glean as much evidence as we can from these caves' rich past before it's too late. The term Picts describes the people who lived in northern Scotland from the 4th to 9th century AD. Their name comes from the Latin picti, meaning painted people, and they've fascinated historians and artists for centuries, despite leaving virtually no written history. The Picts' real legacy is their art, intriguing designs that have never been deciphered. And there's an unusually high number of them here in the Weems Caves on the very edge of the Pictish nation. We've got a Stan here. Is that a Pictish name?
Not as far as I know, no. No, that's not a Pictish name. But we do have some classic Pictish symbols here. This double disc symbol here is a classic one.
What's this one here?
Well, that's a salmon. Again, that's probably original. It's probably Pictish, and it's probably dates from perhaps about the 7th or 8th century AD. But this fish over here...
What, this one down here?
That one there, it's quite different nature and character, and that's probably 19th century in date. We've got 1,500 years or more of carving straight in front of us here.
But we're going to have our work cut out. The 1,500 years of human activity here have featured periods of later occupation, industry, and unfortunately vandalism, including one case when a car was driven into this cave and set alight. Our next target is the Well Cave, which lies underneath the remains of the medieval Macduff's Castle. As well as a rumour of a secret tunnel connecting the cave to the castle, it's also believed that from the 10th to the 15th century, this was home to Christian hermits.
This is a big open area.
Yeah, it's about 12 metres in diameter.
It's high too.
Yeah.
Look, you've got the inscriptions on that side.
Well, they date from about 1860, 1861.
These carvings may be more recent, but they do have a special significance for the archaeologists on the dig. They're from the mid-19th century, when Weems became a popular Victorian attraction, as antiquarians, the forerunners of today's archaeologists, began to uncover the cave's rich history. Unfortunately, some of the methods used in the investigations were far from ideal.
Archaeology at this period wasn't really a science. It wasn't a subject that really come into existence. These were learned gentlemen who were inquiring about Scotland's past, and their qualifications was essentially to be a gentleman and to have the money to indulge their passion and interest.
Do we have any idea if they found any finds in those digs?
Well, yes and no. The records from those early explorations show that a number of finds were made, ceramics and a few other iron objects, but the descriptions and so on they gave them were relatively poor, and these artefacts weren't actually collected.
The technology and methods being used today are a bit more sophisticated. As part of an ongoing project implemented by Fife Council, the caves are now being digitally mapped.
We're getting a scan of about 5mm resolution here.
Well, it's a point every 5mm?
Yeah.
The laser scanning will create a high-definition 3D model of the caves, recording them for posterity. And once the well cave has been scanned, we're going to put in a couple of trenches for our own investigation.
Oh, what's that?
Over in Jonathan's cave, Phil and Raksha are finally through the layer of 20th century rubbish and appear to have found, well, some earlier rubbish. It looks like Phil has hit an occupation layer, but unfortunately these finds are much too late to be Pictish. So far, the only evidence we have of these elusive people are the carvings. Our first trench in here will investigate the well that gave the cave its name, and in particular, Bridge will be looking for any evidence of medieval occupation, the period when hermits are believed to have lived here.
This is the well then over here?
Yeah, this is the well over here.
So the first trench is going to be around this?
It's going to come straight out here, I guess about a metre extending from, see the set stones here?
Yep.
All the way around.
Let's set around the edge.
The other intriguing aspect of the well cave is this tunnel, which according to folklore leads to the 15th century Macduff's castle over 20 metres above our diggers. But in its current state, it doesn't look a particularly welcoming proposition. It's now down to Matt to try and find archaeological evidence of a medieval man-made passageway.
We're going to put a trench sort of against that wall there, halfway into it, and let's see if we get some evidence that people made that hole.
The historical period we're investigating may be vast, some 1,500 years or more. But in geological terms, the Weems caves are young whippersnappers, cut from sandstone in the last 10,000 years.
I always think of caves as being almost as old as the Earth itself. The idea that people were around when they were being created and moved in practically straight away is quite bizarre.
It is, isn't it? I mean, 10,000 years ago, this was at the water's edge. The sea was bashing against this. It was totally inhospitable, as it were. But about 6,500 years ago, there was a change. The ice sheets started to melt. And as they melted, the weight was reduced and the land started to rise out of the water, lifting these up onto dry land. You can see here the layers of rock, these sandstone layers, they're very soft. And as the sea pounds against it, it breaks little bits off along these joints here. And every bit it breaks off, it then bashes further against the rock and knocks another bit off. So you get this it's like a huge tumble dryer of pebbles and rocks going round and round and round and scouring into the rock. And if you look, you see just up there on that shelf, can you see there's a whole load of pebbles just there?
Yeah, yeah.
That's almost just a remnant of that last process of the sea coming in here. Those pebbles are jammed into that rock. Given them a few more years, those pebbles would have brought down that ledge as they were swirled around. The cave would have got bigger.
In Jonathan's cave, Mick has decided to open up another trench in the search for Pictish evidence. It would be nice if one of them gave us a result, if only.
Now, we've actually got a piece of pot from around there, which we think might actually be 17th century.
Right.
So in other words, that could be part of our Jacobite aristocracy that we know lived in here. But above it, we've got...
So what's happening here then?
Well, actually, this cave was once used as a nail-making workshop.
Right.
I mean, there is very, very little stratigraphy here.
So does that mean the Picts who carved these things were extremely small?
Or lying down?
I mean, the only way in which you could actually carve that is either to be extremely small or simply to get down here and work like that.
Yeah.
We think it's a serpent. You can see kind of this head hole here, and then the body curving round like this. And we thought, you know, it's probably a Pictish carving.
How do we know it's Pictish?
Well, we've had an expert looking at it. Anna Ritchie herself has actually seen it and said, yeah, there's no doubt about it. It is Pictish. The beauty of it is, look how low down in the cave it is. So, in fact, there's no way that you could actually make that carving with a ground level at this point.
There was a remarkable find in Fife, about 12 kilometres away from the Weems Caves, at a place called Norrie's Law.
So what happened to it?
It's a tragic tale because about 400 ounces of silver were found. Unfortunately, the people didn't want them to fall into the hands of the Crown treasure trove, and they actually sold them to a peddler who then sold them to a jeweller in Cooper, and he melted them down and made them into spoons. The objects themselves have left some clues. So what they must have done is to start off by making an ingot of silver. And then they would hammer that ingot flat and they would shape it into the leaf shape. And you can tell that because these are hammer marks on the back. They would have flipped it over, given it a light polish, and then engraved the decoration. Then they would have enamelled it and then give it a final polish.
So there's actually quite a complicated number of stages in it.
Absolutely, requiring a great deal of skill as well.
In the sloping cave, Phil's search for Pictish occupation is starting to uncover a lot of bone, although it's too early to say what period it belongs to. And something else has been discovered in this cave, but this time it's not Pictish, and for once we can translate it.
So what is that sort of Y-shaped, fork-shaped thing that we're looking at?
It's a very distinctive Norse or Viking rune.
Oh, crikey. But, I mean, is it what you'd expect to find in a cave like this?
You expect to find anything. And we know that there was Norse activity in this area.
Which letter is it?
It's the letter K. It's the 6th letter in the alphabet. And what's interesting is that the first 6 letters spell Futhok, a sort of magical formula. It's almost as if I were to say, God bless you, or praise be to Allah, or something like that.
This is a timely reminder that these caves contain centuries of history. One of the most frustrating things about this site is how much of the archaeology has been interfered with by the sea, by rusty old nails, by barbecue fires, by graffiti, by a blazing car in a cave. But at last, we're beginning to get down onto untouched early archaeology, like this piece of butchered bone, both here and in Phil's cave. Are we beginning to get to the levels where some of the earliest inhabitants of these caves actually stood? And if so, what else might we find? It's a cold, steely start to day 3 in Fife, and the trenches across this coastline are now producing evidence of centuries of human activity.
I've got a bit of bone in here. Looks burnt. Excellent.
But it's the sloping cave where we discovered unrecorded Pictish carvings that's attracting the most attention.
Look at the quantity of bone, and we're getting it from right down here, right on the base of the trench. And that bone is not the evidence of somebody having a party here. That is somebody living here. There's just too much bone. And at the moment, the only people that we can know use these caves are the Picts.
Down on the eroded beach, Douglas believes he's uncovered a relic from a different era of Weems history.
This is a stone. It's standing upright, a very unnatural position for it to be in, and it's actually contained within a large cut. Now, the obvious question is, who did it and why did they do it? Well, we don't have the exact answers to that now, but one thing we do know, that within the last few years we've had 2 skeletons come out from this area behind us.
Right.
There's no soil there now because the seas eroded it all away, and we've had carbon dates for these, so we know they're about 10th, 11th century AD in date. So it's possible that this is a stone which marks a Christian cemetery, and there may very well be further Christian burials behind this stone. This material here is 15th century, and so everything below this red layer has got to be pre-15th century. Right. So this is probably medieval. It probably relates to the occupation of the caves, and perhaps anywhere before the 10th to 15th centuries.
Right. And it looks like the sort of level it might be in the cave, so that it's sort of related perhaps to that strata coming out.
Very much so. That's another really helpful thing about this layer. Because it's being ploughed, we can tell it was formerly a ground surface, and if we relate to that to the levels of the caves, we can see it was actually formerly quite a level plateau almost coming out from this grassed area into the caves.
They did well to spot that, didn't they, at the bottom of that hole?
That's a very good piece of excavation indeed. It would have been very easy to travel through that.
And this means that this whole part of the coastline would have once looked very different. 600 years ago, the entrance to the well cave would have been a much more welcoming prospect, and as well as providing refuge to hermits, it may also have once been home to the people who farmed the plateau throughout the Middle Ages. It would also suggest that the sloping cave where Phil's been working probably wouldn't have required a degree in potholing to enter it.
Deliberate floor. What we were looking at, that brown stuff with all the black charcoal in
Yeah,
it, was actually trample lying on the top of this floor. And you can see that quite clearly in the section here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably about that thick. And the stone floor itself, well, you can see it's a bit higgledy-piggledy, but it starts here, which is part of the natural boulders.
Right.
And that's part of it there, that natural boulder there. But the interesting thing is when you get to here, you actually get stones that are laid in there deliberately. You can see it is a nice level surface.
They've sort of levelled it up to go with the
That's
bedrock
right.
then. Do we think it's Pictish?
I'd love to say it was. I really would. I mean, it is still at a good height for our carving.
Yeah, yeah.
But realistically, I can't actually tell you. I think the truth is we're going to have to fall back on science and get a radiocarbon date.
Right.
And Phil now has his proof. Subsequent radiocarbon analysis of barley grains lifted from the occupation layer dated it to between 240 and 400 AD, which covers the late Scottish Iron Age and the beginning of the Pictish period.
So really we've got to leave what's underneath for somebody else, haven't we? That's too good to disturb, really.
We're beginning to get an idea of, just by looking in the cracks of what's underneath, and it looks like it is good, clean deposit. So, I mean, there may be other occupation levels underneath, but this is as far as we're going.
That's nice. I like that.
The discovery of this floor is a first for these caves. Proof that people lived here during the era of the Picts, the most mysterious people in British history. A people who left no written records of their nation, just enigmatic and stunning artistry.
There we are.
Is that it finished?
Yes, it's finished.
It is absolutely beautiful. Well done. Are you pleased?
Yes, thank you. It's come out very well. I'm very pleased about that.
The thing that really comes across to me is the contrast between the really high professional craftsmanship that's gone into making this is so different to the sort of graffiti level of the same designs carved on the caves here.
But even these crude carvings are personal declarations of the Pictish identity. And our new evidence shows they not only visited these caves, but some actually lived here. It's now only a matter of time before the Weems caves disappear, but at least we've helped to protect their legacy. Cutting-edge technology has digitally preserved the carved interiors, while the archaeology we've uncovered has told the story of a coastline that's had a brief but very eventful history.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Welcome to Bedford Purley Woods in Cambridgeshire. It's the kind of place you'd think would be the enemy of archaeologists because you can't see anything because of all these trees. But take a look at this. This stunning aerial picture was taken by firing lasers between the trees. It shows all the lumps and bumps. And you see this thing here? Could that be a building and another one there and there and there and there? So is this some kind of complex? Well, back in the 1800s, an antiquarian noted the remains of some Roman buildings in this wood and apparently some Roman statues nearby. So could this high-tech picture be showing us those remains and a lot more besides? Maybe some kind of extensive Roman settlement? Because in some places we can actually see Roman walls on the surface.
Look, this is silly. You can't have archaeology just... It's sticking above the ground. It's not under the ground.
No doubt this is why the site was first discovered by an antiquarian back in the early 1800s. And it's because the remains are close to the surface that they've also shown up so well on this LiDAR picture. The colours, by the way, represent height, with green marking the low ground and white the highest. And we know that some of these buildings are Roman because a few test pits have been dug. but not enough to work out what was actually going on here. So we're opening these 2 trenches to try and solve the mystery.
I think we've actually got a stone wall coming here. You can see there seems to be a face there.
Yeah. I haven't quite got the other side, but I imagine that it pretty much stops at this side just here.
Right. Yep, and it follows the bank.
Oh.
Find.
Ah.
It's just a bit of tile, isn't it? It's just in the rubble. See the line of the wall there?
Oh, right, yeah.
Well, I'd say it's a floor tile.
That looks like Roman floor tile, doesn't it?
Roman floor tile, yeah.
Yep.
Promising.
Very good.
So Matt's wall is Roman. And I have to say, it does look suspiciously like it belongs to the same range of structures that Phil's digging some 80 metres away. Have a look at this wall. So crisp, so well made, so well defined. It just goes on in that direction and maybe in that direction too. And all the archaeology is just below the surface. Who knows what we'll find? Mind you, the way Phil's going won't be long before we find out. Helen, who was the antiquarian who came across this site a couple of 100 years ago?
He was a chap called Edmund Artis. We've got a photo of him, amazingly. And he was a kind of gentleman archaeologist, antiquarian. He was actually interested in most things. He also was an expert on fossils and geology. And in 1828, he made this completely fantastic map of the area. And the bit we're interested in, our wood, is up here. Now you can see we've got this lovely red horseshoe-shaped Roman building, and he's also put these brown dots on, which he codes as ironworks. And I think these must be pits dug to remove iron ore.
Did he actually do any digging?
Well, I have been trying to find that out, and I can find no concrete evidence that he actually dug a hole. It may have been he just came past and saw earthworks or even standing buildings.
Stuart, how does his map relate to what we can see on the ground?
Well, I like it, I do, because when I came up here this morning and sort of walked through, I drew in my sketchbook a shape that looks exactly like that. This thing would have been visible when he drew it, it's still visible now.
Isn't it a bit bizarre, though, that he's drawn this horseshoe building, bits of which seem to go under the road?
Well, I mean, it's possible that when he came here that he could still see remains of bumps going under the surfaces of the road, as it were. But whether they carried on into this field, we'll never know, because if you look over there, it's been quarried out and now it's being used as landfill, so we'll never know whether these ranges actually extended into that area.
Unfortunately, Edmund Artis never published his written reports, so I guess we'll be finishing the job for him over the next 3 days. And it looks like Geophysics may be able to help. They've managed to survey this clearing and have picked up strong signals to the edge of it, but annoyingly they can't go any further because of the trees.
It's really frustrating. I mean, we're actually getting some good results, and you can see really strong responses. I think they're probably actually metalworking, ironworking sort of responses, but they're just... I can't get that bigger picture.
But noise is good.
Well, ironworking suggests some sort of industrial activity, possibly a nearby furnace. It could also help explain all these pits dotted around the site.
What we really need actually is a
Faye?
pen.
You got a problem?
Well, not really a problem so much as we've got a load of rubble coming up again, just like Phil's trench, and what I need to know is whether I can get the machine in, take this down further, or whether you want us to do it by hand.
Well, I think your problem is the root, isn't it?
This is a national nature reserve, and we've agreed that we won't cut any roots more than 1 centimetre thick. Good news for the trees, bad news for Faye. So we can take out all the little rubbish, but just leave the one.
Little rubbish. All this stuff that's vital for the growth of the tree.
But Faye's going to have to dig it by hand.
Am I digging underneath this big root then,
Well,
basically?
you have to. That's
going to be interesting, isn't
and
it?
you'll have to do it by hand, I think.
Meanwhile, Matt's trench has done its job. It's shown that the Roman buildings extend along here and are all part of one settlement. So we're closing it down and packing Matt off to investigate this large earthwork. It appears to be a building that stands alone, which might mean it's important. But again, gardening comes before archaeology. So, as Matt gets his new trench started, I'm wondering if all the walls and tiles we're discovering means our mystery settlement is a Roman villa, exactly as Edmund Artis predicted back in 1828.
So this is an original copy of the artist's book that I've been looking at photocopies of.
That's right, yeah, it's an original copy.
And Artis certainly knew Roman. This massive villa was dug by him at nearby Castor.
The artist talks about Castor as a major villa.
where he looks at Bedford Purlieus as a second order villa. And that's a bit confusing, really. And I think probably the answer is that Caster is such an enormous site, and by comparison, what he saw of the Roman remains at Bedford Purlieus was not unimportant, but lesser when compared with the villa at Caster.
But in spite of Artis's description of a villa here, there may be a chance he got it wrong.
I'm in two minds, actually. It looks as if it could be a standard Roman villa, but the plan is suspicious, and I suspect the linking with ironworking is very intriguing.
Right. This is some stuff we found down the road, just in a cutting, and you can feel the difference in weight. Look at the colours.
I mean, I could spot that as iron straight away.
Exactly.
It's very different to that, isn't it?
This will occur in bands underneath this and stuff, so you've got to get this overburden off.
You've got to get through this potentially to get like that, have you?
Exactly,
right.
yeah.
With so many pits to check, it looks like Roger will have his work cut out. But what I find most surprising is that we could have so much industry close to what we suspect is a villa. Interestingly, we're getting evidence that people lived and cooked in the buildings Phil's investigating.
Cracking.
That's absolutely fantastic, isn't it?
Cracking. What's it like on the other side? Get some of that muck off the other side. Oh yeah, that is some pot, isn't it, really? I mean, look, you're gonna...
fantastic, isn't it?
This mortarium would have been used for grinding food like corn or maize to make bread, and it suggests that we could be close to a kitchen. Look at all this. Brick and loads of tile. It's fantastic, Nick.
This is hypercaust heating flue tile, look, with the marks on it where the plaster sticks on. You've also got lots of roofing material. These are the clay tiles off the roof, one like that, and then a curved one over like that. So, you know, it's all looking much more like a sort of high status building than we thought.
Is that painted plaster?
Yeah, you've actually got stuff with patterns on it, look, and red patches, and there's even more coming out where Matt is. You've got more of it there, haven't you?
There's actually a piece there in the top of this rubble layer with a black painted line across the top.
You've got the trench of the day without any doubt, haven't you?
It's coming up with the goods, isn't it?
So it looks like we could have found the first evidence of a fancy villa here in Matt's Trench.
We could be thinking about, we've got industrial activity here. You know, it's either some furnace or some oven or something like that, a kiln or something.
That's why we put the trench here. We wanted to know what was going on the inside of the building, and you've nailed it. You've got something that's giving us activity inside the building.
What on earth is that then, Anthony?
I have no idea. I've been trying to unravel it for the last 10 minutes.
But as the end of the day draws near, it looks like it's Phil's trench that's turned up the most intriguing find so far.
Has that been worn by a rope round the top?
No, I don't think so.
Is it a very weathered piece of a statue? Is that an arm going?
Well, there you go, you see. I mean, it does make you look. Wonder whether that is some sort of an arm down there, innit? Yeah, I mean,
You got something, guys?
like
Well, we've got a nice piece of what appears to be possibly a bit of carved stone.
This?
Well, yeah, but what you can't see, Tony, is that round here,
yeah,
it does look like an arm. It really does.
I wouldn't mind. If it's Roman and it's carved stone, that would be a big one for us, wouldn't it?
Yep.
You were the one who was saying, oh, it's very rare to find things like this.
It is very rare, but we have our occasional moments. Yeah. Don't you wish at a moment like this we were 19th century antiquarians? We could just tip it out, we'd actually find out what it is.
What, rip it out without bothering about the archaeology?
Can I point out that thankfully we are not 19th century archaeologists, we are responsible 21st century archaeologists. We want to do this properly.
Have you got no sense of tradition?
Basically, Phil's telling us to clear off and come back when he's ready to lift this piece of stone, and crucially, when we'll be able to see the other side of what he's uncovered here. Meanwhile, carefully placed in between the ant's nest and the deadly nightshade bushes, Matt's trench is revealing the first glimpse of some sort of posh structure.
You can see the mortar there?
Yeah, coming up, yeah.
Yeah, look, there's the edge of another one there.
Yeah, well, that could be a lead into a flue or something.
So this would have formed some kind of floor heating or something like that?
Yeah, if it's a hypercaust, yeah, there's sort of pili within the room itself. It begins to look ever more structural. So what's it actually doing?
Well, what it's doing now is shining X-rays onto the rock, and the different elements in the rock will sort of reflect those X-rays back. And if we look at the intensity of them, we can say what's there and how much is there. Right, so that's nearly 50% there.
Good solid iron, that,
It is,
isn't it?
absolutely. I
That's
mean,
worth
that's
mining.
almost pure iron oxide, really. If you look here, Stuart, look, we've got almost 2% manganese.
What's significant about manganese?
Well, manganese is one of those things which really helps slag form. It helps slag form, it helps it flow.
Oh, I see.
You see, and iron smelting is not just about making iron. If you can get your slag to flow nicely, it means your furnace keeps working, doesn't get all clogged up. So this is fantastic ore, not just for its iron content, which is very high, but also the other bits and pieces in with it, the other elements in with it. Manganese, fantastic ore to smelt.
Having established that the pits with the spoil heap around them are to do with mining for iron ore, we now want to check one of the other shallower pits, which could have been dug for a different purpose. Meanwhile, over at the posh end of the site, Matt's now extended his trench over the bathhouse and is making quick progress. But ideas are changing.
There are several things, actually. I mean, one is that the orientation is wrong. It doesn't look like the plan of a villa that I recognise from elsewhere as a standard courtyard villa.
The new theory is that this bathhouse is not part of a Roman villa, but built for a manager or overseer who was looking after the ironworks here.
Is it possible that we're looking at some overseer here who's working on behalf of the state?
Right.
And the state, of course, I think, have a very, very large presence in the building underneath Caster Village.
Oh, yes, yes.
And it could be some procurator there who is not only superintending Fenland estates, but ironworking estates as well.
Yeah,
And how far is Caster?
Caster's fantastic, because it's only a few miles away that way.
And this was also excavated by our antiquarian.
Artist spent many years excavating at Caster, where he found enormous building complexes underneath the modern village.
It's a good idea. Our site, controlled from Caster, could have been one of several iron production centres situated on the outskirts of Durham, the main trading centre in the region. Ermine Street, the M1 of its day, literally ran through the town, and with the River Nene close by, iron could have been dispatched by road or river to almost anywhere in Roman Britain. And if this bathhouse was for an overseer, it looks like he lived in fine style, judging by these chunks of painted plaster that show the colour scheme of the walls of this building 1600 years ago. It's a stark contrast to Phil's trench, where there's no sign of painted plaster or luxuries like underfloor heating. But we did find what looked like a carved stone here yesterday. And now that our experts have had time to carefully examine it, I'm curious to know what they think it is.
It's a stone.
A stone?
A stone.
But not just any random stone. Phil thinks it's been definitely shaped for some purpose or other.
Take a look at this one here. Now that was found just outside in the angle of the walls there.
Yeah.
Look how that ordinary stone has been used as a whetstone to sharpen tools. And it just goes to show that every stone you find on a site like this, you have to look at it, think about it to make sure it's not an artefact.
Thanks, I think that's a very good lesson to learn from someone who was sure that was a statue last night.
It looked very good at the time.
But at least Phil's trench and Faye's trench put in here have given us lots of useful detail about the actual buildings in this range.
Basically, we've got a collapsed building.
Colourful, isn't it?
It's great, isn't it? You can just see where you are there. You've got these collapsed this stone wall, and beneath it, we've got this tile layer, which is our roof.
Yeah.
And then here, we've got more of this kind of collapsed roof building material.
It's very black, isn't it?
It is. I mean, this building's been burnt down.
Right.
Although there's a lot more to learn about this range, we now have some idea what these buildings looked like. This is a reconstruction of the area where Phil was digging, which we now know was a series of rooms based around a courtyard. We think these were workshops or living accommodation for the people who worked here, a workforce probably of slaves, which would explain why we didn't find any coins or items of real value here. The question now is, have we discovered the main iron smelting area up here on the slightly higher ground? Time's ticking away, and Mick has called me urgently from over here somewhere because he desperately needs Roger, our man with the suitcase. What's the problem, Mick?
We've got some material down here that we're not quite sure what it is, and we need you to look at it, Rog, and tell us, because we think it might be bloomery stuff, in which case, you know, we're in a furnace, but it may not be, maybe just slag.
What can you see there?
Well, when you feel it, it's very, very dense.
Yeah, it is, certainly is, yeah.
It's also quite porous. It doesn't look like slag.
I mean, could it be the bloom?
It's either that or roasted ore. Let's have a look, see what you've got.
Now, this is what I call a real expert. Someone who'll look at a lump of crud like this and tell you what it is.
I would be thinking more towards roasting hearth, having looked at that.
So that means you can really take all that out then, doesn't it?
So we can get on?
Good. Yeah.
That's pretty efficient. You didn't even use your suitcase.
I didn't even need the suitcase. There you go.
We'll keep digging to make sure, but it looks like what we found is remains of where they've been roasting the ore like this to prepare it for smelting, and the actual furnace won't have been far away. It's a great result. We now know this enclosure is a Roman iron smelting area, and we can now identify what looks to be another similar enclosure just here. But with time almost up, how does our posh bathhouse fit into the story? We know we have a building that collapsed when the site fell out of use in the 4th century, but it's proving tricky to interpret.
Sorry, could I just... there appears to be another stone on top of this one, which makes me think perhaps we might have a robbed wall as opposed to floor.
So there, that's a wall, not a floor?
Yeah.
So I'm on the wall now.
I was going to say, you're on the wall, yeah, and I'm inside.
But I'm still over the floor of another room.
Possibly.
So you've actually got a wall running with... That still means that could be a door jam, and that looks like the corner of where there was a door.
So there's a room there, and there's a room there.
But no wall.
Wall has gone, robbed away.
A lot more work's needed here, but we can get some idea of the extent of the bathhouse from the size of this earthwork. And if our theory is right about the link with Castor, then it's possible that our bathhouse was laid out like the one shown here in Artis's picture, which means we're talking about a building that would have looked something like this. It was probably a standalone facility used by the official overseer on what would have been a state-controlled iron working site. Our dig's certainly given me a newfound respect for this man, Edmund Artis, who was clearly a very good archaeologist for his time, but died before he could publish his written reports. His map of the Archaeology, drawn in 1828, has proved to be largely accurate, and it's not just the buildings, but also the pits he recorded that are key to understanding this site.
Goodness me, it's a journey to the centre of the earth.
What we now know is that in Roman times, a lot of the rubbish was being thrown in these pits.
So basically, this pit was open at the same time that those buildings were being occupied and used. And this looks a bit clayey to me. So is that what they're going for, the clay?
Yeah, there's no sign of ironstone or any bands of ironstone in this at all. So it must be clay for some purpose.
And the little sort of pock marks and things I can see in there, is this sort of root activity?
Well, some of it is, but some of these dark patches, if you carefully clean them back, you can actually see adze marks or picks marks where they've actually levered the clay out from this pit.
Fantastic. We now know not all these pits were dug for iron ore. Many, like this one, would have been dug for clay to build and repair the iron smelting furnaces. So at the end of 3 days, we can now picture this long-lost Roman settlement as it must have looked in its heyday around 200 AD. What's been hidden in these woods is a massive ironworking site, with the furnaces and ore roasting pits on the slightly higher ground, while the mining was going on here, chasing the seam of natural iron ore. The workshops and living quarters were not far away, and were very much second class, as mentioned by Edmund Artis. But there was at least one fancy Roman building, a bathhouse, situated well away from the industry here on the eastern side of the site. But our story is not quite over, because for the next few hours our archaeologists will be measuring, recording, taking photographs, and eventually they'll write a proper archaeological report on this site, which is really rather nice because we'll be finishing the job that Edmund Artus, for whatever reason, didn't complete himself. And then when we've all finally gone, nature will take over this whole site again, just as it did nearly 2,000 years ago.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.